And I think we need to go back to World War I to kind of understand where we are now, because just as we were at the cusp of the industrial age and production, we're at the cusp of the transhumanist age. And it's not necessarily production in a physical sense that we're staring down, but it's this micro universe of nanotechnology and virtual programming and genetically modified organisms. This is the new industrial era. This is exactly where we are in respect to where we were with machines and metal and all that Iron Age stuff coming to fruition and really, peaking in a lot of ways in the 30s and the 40s, but clearly, getting its birth in World War I. And here we are. We're at the other end of that. We are in this area that has very little to do in some ways with hard metals and forging manufactured goods. It's all taking place on a nanoscale, on a micro scale. And the economies that will result, that will manifest as a result of this, in some ways, linear arc. I mean, it exponentially explodes at certain points along the way, but it is a linear arc from hard metal, big machines to small, almost microscopic, in some ways very plastic machines. The mutation of matter and non-matter. I mean, this is where we are right now. So we're at the precipice. We're at the front of this. We're also at the front of the collapse of the economy, and we are hearing the drum of war starting up. Now, what we're seeing here with the Occupy movement and the desire, or no, it's not the desire. I just think it's the outward manifestation of an agenda or programming that's been going on for a long time, and it just does not go away. But I also think that we're trying to balance out these disparate parts of the human spirit, and we don't quite understand that on some level. I think what's really going on here is that there's a war going on for our souls. And who's going to lay claim over our souls? Is it going to be the socialists, the people that brought us the Bolshevik Revolution and all the hell that wrought, or is it going to be the capitalists and the robber baron caste? And look at the hell that wrought as well. I mean, so, we're having to define, who we are in some ways in very unique and new terms. People like Daniel Pinchbeck are getting into, alternative models of economy. Some of the more kind of nascent versions of that are local economies, gift economies, and I think these are all things that are worth looking at. They're really worth looking at, but I'm not necessarily sure that we can attack this from a social level. I think that the secret sauce is that we have to simultaneously go down two tracks. One track is the social economic track, and the other is the spiritual, in the what I call the quantum reality track. And we have to kind of live in two worlds at the same time, have one foot in one world and one foot in the other world. No matter what you think of the historical figure known as Jesus, the famous saying is, be in this world but not of it. And this is kind of what we're talking about here, is being able to live in a world where it's a very kind of open-ended reality. It's like anything is possible in some ways, especially if you're living in right livelihood and willing to, be authentic and to be a sovereign individual and to think for yourself and to see beyond the illusion. Then it's incumbent upon you in some way to figure out how to access information from that realm and then bring it over to the other side, so that we can have a kind of a greater relationship to not only this world, but that quote unquote other world as well. This is the big challenge. Over the weekend, I watched the whole thing once over, and then I watched the first episode again. There's again, Netflix is Netflix is great. I can't rave about Netflix enough. I know a lot of people got pissed off when they went over to their, higher pricing on the 2 tiers. I don't care. I don't get the DVDs sent to my house. I just get the streaming, and there's plenty for me to watch on the streaming side. So I watched. This was a mini series, but it was 3 movies, 3 feature-length movies, like close to 2 hours long each, about Carlos the Jackal, and it was produced by Canal Plus, which is a French media company, very big media. In fact, I actually worked for Canal Plus for a while, indirectly. Canal Plus had been bought by Vivendi, and Vivendi bought the company that I was working for at one point. So, in fact, I actually had an email exchange with the CEO of Vivendi at one point in time. That was really funny. He was getting tossed out on his butt. And I sent him an email and said, hey, I thought you had a great vision for this. Hang in there. The guy returned my email. It was very funny. So anyway, he didn't know me. So anyway, this movie, Carlos, it's about Carlos the Jackal, infamous terrorist. Ilyich was his first name. He was born and raised in Venezuela, educated in Moscow. So he was a true socialist. And the movie is a fictional portrayal of his life. And, it takes a lot of license, but there's a lot of facts in there. But what's fascinating about the whole thing is they start off as these, anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist agents. And you can see the networks that were at play in the early 70s. The Japanese Red Brigade and Bader Meinhof and these other cells in Europe. And these were people that were deeply committed to the socialist cause. And they saw that, Israel and the United States were the great, imperialist monsters, and that they were deeply tied into, entrenched with the struggle of the Palestinian people. But then what happens is that as time goes on, and then eventually the wall in Berlin falls, Carlos and his comrades wind up being caught up in the chessboard of the political regime at that time, and in the world in general. Because at the beginning of the film, in the beginning of Carlos's quote unquote career as a terrorist, they staged this OPEC event, and this is a real event. It took place in Vienna, and what they did is they took all the OPEC ministers hostage. And at that time, the goal was to kill the Iranian oil minister. And this was because Saddam Hussein had pretty much put a hit out on him, and they were going to use this event as a bit of propaganda for the Zionist war, right, against the Zionists. But Saddam thought that the Iranians were keeping the price down on oil, and he wanted to raise the price so that he could get more money for his oil, and then take that money and then put it into these activities to fund the insurgency. So they take these guys hostage, hijack a plane, and they killed none of the Libyans that were part of this thing, and they were supposed to land in Tripoli. So now the Libyans were pissed, and the only place that they could go is Yemen, and they get bounced around. And so the end of the story, that's part of the story, is he has to let go. Carlos has to let go of all the OPEC ministers, including the Iranian minister, right? So at the beginning of the film, he's supposed to kill this guy. At the end of the film, it's the Iranians that are offering him asylum in Sudan. It's fascinating. So you see how quickly the chessboard, the pieces on the global chessboard move around. And you also see that these people are fired up by ideology, but it's merely ideology. There's not necessarily any real spiritual connection to what they're doing. And that's the downfall. because they're killing innocent people and children along the way. So there's no sanctity for life, none. And they would counter with, well, the Zionists have no sanctity for life either. So it's war. It's the only thing that they'll recognize, full-on war. So what that does, obviously, is it buys into the duality, the system of duality, right? And then we've been dancing with duality for the last 450,000 years, according to Dr. Jack Pruitt. So then we've got non-duality. And what does that mean? Non-duality is, passive resistance. That's what we've been seeing in Occupy Wall Street. How is that working out for them? This is the crux. We are on the horns of a dilemma here on this planet. How do we experience change? How do we experience change? And do we even need to experience change? Is the whole concept of experiencing change wrought with metaphysical and philosophical pitfalls? What's important to you out there? What is important to you? Is it being safe and secure? Is that important to you? Is it being creative and productive? Is that important to you? Is it being economically well off, which would fall into the safe and secure camp? Is that important to you? Is being authentic important to you? Is being real important to you? Is being free important to you? What's important to you? What's important to you? I think that's the big question. And is what is important to you, how does that line up against the screen of our current social conditioning? Is it relevant? Is it irrelevant? Are you in anachronism? I think that's where it all needs to start. I think that's where it needs to start. And I know it's important to me. At least I do, sitting here in front of you at 10:28 in the morning, 11:14, 2011. But what may be important to me a year from now may be different. Maybe my core values will be the same. Things that I was born with, and how I go about, manifesting them may be different a year from now. So I think this whole concept of change is a fascinating one. Absolutely fascinating. There's a book by Uspensky, Pete Uspensky, and what is it? It's the strange story of Ivan. I forget his last name, but in the book, Uspensky's character. If you don't know who Uspensky was, he was a writer. He was a writer. He was a good writer, minor sort of novelist, and he was part of Gurdjieff's inner circle. And he eventually broke with Gurdjieff because he saw that Gurdjieff couldn't do anything for people, that he could only take people so far in their quest to break through and experience, what I'd call immanent consciousness, being directly connected into source from moment to moment to moment to moment, and being an active agent of source. That's what Gurdjieff theoretically was trying to get people to do. Anyway, Uspensky wrote this book, and in it, his character has the opportunity to relive his entire life. And what he saw, or what he experienced in the book, in his character's movement through his life where he lived, is that he pretty much did everything the same all over again. And even when he tried to do something different, the result kind of went in the same direction. It was really fascinating. So in some ways, Uspensky was saying that change was futile. I mean, even somebody like Krishnamurti would say that change is futile, that there really can be no change. And if you think about it, now I'm not being a pessimist here, because I do think that we are on the precipice of something very profound. But if you think about it, we haven't really experienced much change, ever. It's always kind of been the same. The game has changed a little bit. There might have been more resources available here in the United States, but at a price, at a huge price for the rest of the world, and for us in some ways.